This is Harvard on the Map, presented by the Harvard Graduate School of Design, covering innovative ideas and thought leaders in digital cartography, Earth observation, and all things geospatial, with your host, Jennifer Horowitz.
Hello and welcome to Harvard on the Map. I'm here with Sean Gorman, the CEO of Pixel8.Earth, and I'm excited to have him on the program. Thanks for being here, Sean.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so first, I'd love if you could tell some of our listeners who might not be as familiar with the work that Pixel8 does, a little bit about how you got started and the work you do.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we're a small startup and fairly new into the process, but the goal of the team is to build a crowdsourced 3D map of the globe. And specifically, we've been looking at being able to apply that map to augmented reality and autonomy. And basically, we've been spending the last year and a half or so building out the infrastructure to enable that, so that we kind of have the computer vision problems solved, the computational scaling problems, and an interface that is easy for folks to navigate, so that, you know, the fundamental concept is you can upload video and then get a 3D geo-rectified model back that you can stitch together with anybody else that's contributed video. And so as you get more video pushed into the platform, you get more of the globe mapped, and all these things get interconnected and stitched together. And collectively, the idea is the community can build out this 3D map and update it, and have ownership in that. And so that's been the general goal of what we've gone towards. We just recently opened up the platform to a set of ambassadors, and so we shipped them GoPro cameras to help them start collecting data and give them a little incentive to get out into their neighborhood. And then we've been giving access to those folks to come on and then upload that video and start making 3D maps of their neighborhoods and cities and towns. That's really exciting, especially, you know, with COVID and the pandemic, to see, you know, folks on totally another part of the globe that you can't go to and see what that looks like in 3D and explore it. One of our first ambassadors was in London. So it's been really neat to see like all these cool parts of like Soho and City of London, and seeing those things get built out in 3 dimensions.
Oh, I'm sure. And these ambassadors, are they people who have geospatial backgrounds or drone photography backgrounds or photographic background? What is the background of an ambassador for Pixel8?
Yeah, it's really a cool wide variety of things. We really wanted to get a diverse set of folks with different geographies and places that we wanted to test mapping, because, you know, kind of the obvious things are going to do like New York and San Francisco, but we also wanted to see, what does it look like to map in Africa? What does it look like to map in Asia? What does it look like to map in the Middle East? Just because each one of these places has challenges with how you reconstruct in 3D, how you get it registered into spatial coordinate systems and stitch them all together. So we didn't want to, you know, just start with the easy places. We wanted to try to get a diversity of perspectives and opinions and people. And we did the same thing with the backgrounds, right? We wanted, you know, a lot of folks have background in OpenStreetMap, a lot of people have backgrounds in photogrammetry, some people have backgrounds in GIS and mapping, other folks, you know, are interested in gaming and wanting to create 3D models for gaming purposes. So we really tried to find a diversity of both use cases and people across the globe to really kind of stress test the system and get a good understanding of what we need to open it up to everybody, which is the eventual goal.
Fascinating. Yeah, I've been playing around on your website, which is incredibly interesting, and I encourage anyone who's listening to go to their website. But one of the things you mentioned, mapping in Africa, and a blog post on your website was discussing the value of a 3D map as a public good, and the impact that has. So I wonder if, you know, for users who may not be, you know, as familiar with the difference and the value of a 3D map versus a 2D map, I wonder if you could expound on that a little bit and describe its value.
Yeah, there's a couple of different perspectives on it. You know, I think we've all, you know, people in mapping and the public at large, I think, has gotten pretty comfortable with 2D maps. You know, projects like OpenStreetMaps and existing commercial products like Google Maps and Apple Maps, you know, where we've seen 2-dimensional cartography. And oftentimes, you know, that'll get vectorized and turned into 3D buildings, or even Google Earth, where they'll take satellite imagery and aerial and turn those into 3D models. And those are all super helpful from a variety of use cases. And then what we saw emerging more recently is the desire to start doing augmented reality at global scale, like, being able to have these augmented experiences in the built environment. And then also autonomy, right? Having delivery robots and autonomous cars and these kind of things. And the fascinating thing is these applications also need 3D maps. They need to be able to navigate the globe in 3 dimensions and localize where they're at based on images and features within that built environment. But the challenge is, traditionally in the mapping space, and a lot of all the team we had previously worked at Digital Globe, Maxar, so we've done a lot of work with satellites, and satellites are awesome, right? You can create really cool 3D models, same thing with aerial. But the challenge with those is that all the perspectives are up in the air. And when you're trying to localize for augmented reality and you're walking through a city, or you're trying to navigate as a robot to deliver a package for FedEx, you're on the ground. And so those two perspectives don't line up, right? You have a perspective up here and a perspective down there. So when you try to use these perspectives in the air to localize things on the ground, there's a lot of challenges around that. And so we started looking at could you create a hybrid of aerial perspectives and ground perspectives and stitch them all together, and then use that as a way to help these things navigate. And by doing so, could you make it a lot cheaper to collect the data and more economically efficient? And then one of the cool byproducts is, in addition to creating those feature databases to do localization for things like augmented reality, you also get these really cool photorealistic 3D models. And so the basic thought was that there's tons of great use cases for smart cities and municipal planning and urban planning, for doing 3D GIS, architectural things, environmental planning, all these kind of bits. We could give away all that data for free, and then use the data for doing localization as what keeps the project viable, and be able to sell that up to the companies that need that for doing augmented reality and autonomy, and and anonymize that data and have kind of a good dual license model that keeps the project sustainable, so that there's the resources, especially compute. Computing these things, having a 3D map of the globe is not trivial. And so you need to be able to pay for all those servers to keep those things running. But at the same time, you want people to contribute to the community, to have ownership in it. And so basically we've created this open Creative Commons license that you can do whatever you want to with it. You can go commercial things with it. You can do nonprofit things with it. Basically, the only requirement is that you just attribute the project and give credit, so that more people join the project and upload more data. So we kind of saw it as like, the classic public-private partnership, where we could have a public good, but we need to subsidize that public good because there's not government funding in the traditional economic sense. So we need a source of private funding. And the good thing is there's a lot of large companies really investing big time in augmented reality, and hopefully in the future we see that scaling out to be autonomy also. And so that's the balance we tried to strike of how to give the community real meaningful ownership and create value for their contributions, but at the same time be able to create an economic model that keeps the whole thing feasible and growing in a vibrant way.
It's such a fascinating topic, and I admit I did spend maybe a good 2 hours of my morning just sipping my coffee and reading your blog, which is really so interesting and touches on so many different topics that relate to this. I wonder, what is the most surprising sector to you that has made use of 3D mapping, and these companies like Apple with Apple Look Around, and Microsoft Virtual Earth, and Niantic, and a whole variety of them. But what's been the most surprising sector that's needed a 3D mapping platform?
Yeah, thank you for reading the blog. That's awesome for the team, right? Just that people outside of us are interested and find it engaging. But yeah, I think that to answer the question, I think one of the really surprising pieces, and it's probably more testament to my age than anything, is a lot of the gaming use cases. That there's things like Unreal and Unreal Engine and Unity that are creating entire 3D worlds, and things like Fortnite. And they're increasingly wanting to not only have completely kind of fantastical things that are detached from reality, but also have 3D models of the globe built out in reality that you can have gaming type experiences in it. So like in things like Unreal, you can upload geospatial LiDAR data and create gaming experiences around it. Cesium has done really cool things with 3D tiles. They have a big partnership with NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Unreal, I believe, to begin to bring in their real world 3D models into gaming. And traditionally the challenges in that, though, is that it's not really DIY. If you look at something like Microsoft's Flight Simulator, right, they're using OpenStreetMap, they're using all of the Microsoft aerial imagery, but these are things that the average person can't go out and collect. I mean, you can contribute to OpenStreetMap, but you can't go fly a plane or rent a satellite. And so one of the things that's been really, kind of surprising and exciting is that one of the things that I think we've opened up is the ability for folks in that community to go and just build that data themselves, right? Just go out with a GoPro camera and go collect the area that you want to drop into your game. And that idea of like, be able to do something like Grand Theft Auto in your own neighborhood, and you can go and build out your own neighborhood and contribute it in and have other people build upon that in a collaborative way. And then those things can get reused in a lot of different ways. There's always kind of the cool thing about an open data platform, right, is that people are going to use the data in ways that you never imagined. It's also like one of the most exciting things, right, is just to see everybody else's creativity go so much further than anything that the team initially imagined. Is just, I think what makes platforms so much fun to work on.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting, the gaming part piece, even in looking at the history of Google Earth, understanding how Niantic and John Hinckley, who's the CEO of Niantic, played a role in the history of Google Earth and Google Maps, and it's just fascinating. I didn't even know that connection between the gaming world and mapping existed, but it really does, historically play a major part. In any case, so now I want to get some more background on you and how you arrived in the geospatial arena. And I saw you were also the winner of the Fisher Prize, which I won in undergrad, which
awesome.
Is very, very specific, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I would love to hear about your background and how you kind of arrived within the geospatial arena.
Yeah, I mean, the way I ended up in doing kind of technology and startups was totally by happenstance. When I was at George Mason as a grad student, and we were in a simulation and modeling laboratory, largely doing transportation modeling. And at the time, I'd collect a lot of fiber optic data, and I was kind of trying to map the internet from a physical manifestation perspective. And right when I started that work at George Mason, 9/11 happened, maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the PhD program, which I'm now really dating myself. And so there ended up being an earmark from Congress to do critical infrastructure research, and we said, hey, we have this fiber optic database. We're looking at digital divide. Would it be interesting? Here's some thoughts on how you look at it for like vulnerabilities and infrastructure resiliency. And we didn't hear anything for a couple of months, and then they hired a director out of government to run it, and we got a phone call saying, hey, is that simulated data or is that real data? Like, no, it's real data. We're geographers, right? We map we map things. We don't simulate things so much, or at least not in that way. And they said, can you come in and brief us? And we said, sure. And they're like, we've spent the last 4 or 5 months in government believing that this data wasn't possible to aggregate because the fiber optic lines are all owned by private providers. People didn't know where they were. And it just so happened like during the master's research that I had done back during the dot-com boom is just got on these have these bulletin boards for people that ran like the routers for the internet. And basically I told them, hey, I'm doing research on digital divide. Can you share with me your maps of where your fiber optics and your router routes are and stuff like that? And they're like, yeah, sure, awesome. Internet's gonna be great for everybody. Let's show how hard we're working to get networks out to everybody. And so just happened to weirdly collect this pile of data, and but when it came to all of a sudden the government coming in and said to give us this data, corporations were a bit standoffish about it. So it was just kind of this really weird, very unique situational thing where the data we had was this really valuable asset the government was very interested in. And so we started doing research around it, and we started briefing people, and and kind of it was, even back then the media sensationalism kind of kicked in. Basically, a Washington Post reporter heard about that we were briefing folks, and it was leaving them uncomfortable that this data was available, and like a grad student and his professors had put it together and done some interesting things with it. So the long story short, I've already probably made it too long, is Washington Post wrote a story about it, ended up on the front page because it probably was the slowest news day of all time.
Yeah,
and then it snowballs, right? Then like the CNN trucks show up on campus, and Fox and NBC and the rest of it. And it was this whole 15 minutes of fame media tour. And the outcome of it would basically is like the university saw the media trucks and said, oh, send in the patent attorneys. There must be something we can patent and then license off. So then we spent a bunch of time with patent lawyers, seeing if there were patents. And of course, they found something that they thought was patentable. And we're like, no, this is like glorified MATLAB scripts and some C code and total hodgepodgey academic stuff. And so basically, once they filed the patents, they said, either you need to start a company and we'll license the patents to you, or we'll sell the patents off to whoever is willing to pay for them. And we're like, no, this is, we know how thin the coding rigor of this is, and that how much work it's needed. It would be irresponsible to like license it to somebody. It's like it needs a lot of work. So let's see if we can do the work. To make it into something useful. And so we ended up spinning a company out of George Mason back in 2005, or 2004, 2005. And then that company we ran for about 7 years, and then it was bought by Esri in like 2012. And so that was kind of the weird way that we ended up in doing technology and startups. So it's completely happenstance. I was completely set on being an academic and writing papers and doing research and doing those kind of things. But it was a really fortuitous and fun, originally what I thought would be a detour, but it's addictive, and you get engaged and excited to the thrill of trying to grow a company and do something interesting with it. And so we just continued to do it. So this is the third startup from the team. And I think 3 of the 4 people were at the original startup that we spun out of George Mason. And we had one new addition from the second company that was bought by Digital Globe, which was how we ended up there. And it was at Digital Globe where a lot of the initial thoughts of doing this 3D map of the globe, just because they were doing Digital Globe, now Maxar. They bought a company called Vricon, which was like a joint venture between them and Saab that was doing satellite-based 3D maps of the globe, which are amazing and super cool. And but just weren't particularly good for these new emerging markets that we saw. And so we started thinking, is there another way to do this? Could we hybridize this? And one of the co-founders from the first 2 companies had gone to Stanford to do a postdoc. And while he was there, he was experimenting with combining LiDAR and satellites, planets, like really they're low resolution but really high frequency satellites. How to improve the accuracy using aerial LiDAR data. So the aerial LiDAR would be older, the planet data would be really fresh, and basically combine the two so you get high accuracy and high freshness, or temporal frequency. And so we basically said, well, kind of think about it, planet satellites, doves are kind of like cell phones in space. Could we do same thing with cell phones on the ground and action cameras and dash cams? So could we use this like roughly positioned GPS data and then use open aerial reference data like USGS 3D LiDAR data and fuse those things together so we get really good spatial accuracy and also get really good temporal refresh that anybody can update that. And so that was the breakthrough that really kind of enabled the crowdsourcing, that it made it really cheap for us to do compute. We could do things really accurately, and we could allow anybody to participate into the project instead of the more traditional route of I'm going to drive a Google Street View car, or I'm going to go have a highly laden sensor array in the air or on the ground, and say, no, really we just need a camera and a GPS. Get good GPS signal, good camera signal that's high resolution. You can make really cool 3D models. So very long-winded route from A to B of kind of how we got started, but it was a totally weird way to fall into doing startups in geo. And we're actually in a school of public policy, so we weren't explicitly geographers. Although just about everybody in the group had a geography or urban planning background, or like a complexity science kind of AI background. But generally find like interdisciplinary things is where the best ideas come from. You kind of like break out of the silo and you have to work with people from other silos, and then you germinate and find really weird, wacky things. And that's exactly here, right? It's like, computer vision and machine learning combined with remote sensing and geomatics, geodesy, and fusing those 2 things together, which, normally, the computer vision people don't want to deal with like absolute coordinate systems and stuff. Like, just give me a Cartesian grid, it's all good.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been a fun trip and super exciting to kind of roll through different opportunities. And the team, myself, has been very lucky to find really smart people to work with that who are way better at all the different aspects of this than I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are more than qualified, but there's also your team. Your CTO I saw has a PhD in experimental condensed matter physics. I thought that is interesting. How that guy got to this is so interesting. Anyways, I've loved hearing about Pixel8.Earth. I really appreciate your time. And I wanted to end off with a question that I asked all of my interviewees, which is to describe a time where you were lost, whether that was geographically or in your life or career, and how you found your way back again.
It's really funny because it's kind of a family joke, and I think even when they did the Washington Post article, it was a joke that they put into the article was that growing up, I had the worst sense of direction. I still have a pretty terrible sense of direction. Like Google Maps and other routing apps have totally saved me, but yeah, I think I was perpetually lost. Like, it was when it came to like navigating. My dad was in the Air Force, so we lived in Germany, and we moved around quite a bit also. And so when we'd have to navigate around, we always had paper maps to go through and do that. And the irony is, like, me as a geographer who's worked all of his career now in making maps and doing these kind of things, it was always my sister who did the navigation, but she was so much better at reading the map and orienting us and getting us to where we need to be, because I was terrible at it. And so, so the irony that I ended up, going into that as being my profession is something that I was abjectly terrible and the worst in the family at. Always found pretty ironic. But yeah, so like me getting lost doing various things, especially now like living in Colorado, where you do a lot of like backcountry skiing and hiking and orienteering and so forth, and I'm still terrible. Like one of the first ideas for doing Pixel8.Earth was being able to do like project an AR overlay for doing like backcountry skiing, so that you could go and see what avalanche conditions were on a slope, and then also be able to navigate to find things, right? Because when you're in the backcountry, both trying to figure out where you're going and then figuring out if where you're going is safe or not is always kind of tricky. And especially the orienteering stuff I was always terrible about. And so when we were talking about this, a bunch of us like to ski and do things living in Colorado. We're like, and we initially were like, oh, we're going to do this with that. And then we realized that like the market was really just us. We needed to do something a little more broad based. But it's definitely a common theme as far as getting lost, but being a geographer has definitely been an ongoing duality.
Sure, I totally understand. I too am often lost and saved by Apple Maps, Google Maps, the like. Well, I appreciate your time, and thanks so much for being on the program.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun, and really appreciate giving me and the team an opportunity to share their work, and hopefully folks check it out and contribute some video once we get it, further along and open to the general public.
Absolutely. I myself was going to email you after this to ask if I could potentially be an ambassador for my area. So that sounds super cool, and I definitely encourage listeners to contribute as well. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sean. I'll talk to you later.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great week.
You too.